liked Twilight. I feel like there's like this millennial compulsion to retcon that and be like, I didn't like Twilight. I did. I liked it. And you know what? I still like it. I reread it within the last 3 years and I loved every minute of it. It was so bad, but I did like it. Okay. So I'm not embarrassed.
Everyone, and welcome to the Booktown Fantasy Podcast. I'm Lorraine.
I'm Addison.
And we are two best friends who love all things fantasy. Through this podcast, we'll explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Before we get started, we have a quick disclaimer. This is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations and use explicit language. We are adults, and at times we will use adult language. Additionally, the books on the podcast will cover adult themes and we will be discussing them in detail. So please be mindful of little listening ears and your own limitations are for triggering topics. A little about the nature of this podcast. The realm of fantasy book discussion podcasts has grown immensely over the years and every podcast does things a little differently. We have decided to keep the book series episodes spoiler-free and primarily centered around books we have never read before. This allows us to keep the podcast feeling like a book club so that if you are new to a series, you will have someone to read and think about it with. For those of you who are graduates of a series, we hope we can allow you to experience those first read feelings all over again and get some free entertainment out of our crazy speculations, theories, and discussions as we make our way through these books. And maybe even catch some things that you didn't on your first read through.
Second that to the crazy theories and discussions, because I guarantee we will say something that is so off base, you will not even be able to comprehend how our minds went there, but we'll find a way. I think our vision for this podcast was a little bit like, you know, that feeling when you first finished a fantasy book and you were like, oh my God, I must discuss this with someone or I will literally implode. Okay, I will die. So you give it to your friend and you get to watch them go through the journey. And it's just so exciting and hilarious because they're so naive. And you're just like, oh, sweet child, sweet summer child. You know,
you have no idea.
Exactly. You are in for a world of pain and joy and laughter and all that. But that's our goal, ultimately. We want to be those best friends for you so you can laugh at our hilarious theories or emotionally support us through the devastating parts. We're also hoping if you've read it, but you are struggling with a book hangover, we can help be the cure.
That being said, there will be times when an episode may be the exception. So if there is ever an exception to the spoiler-free nature of the podcast, we will give a big disclaimer at the beginning of that particular episode. We will also be covering fantasy shows and movies as well, but our primary focus will be on books. So stay tuned for updates on which shows and movies we will be covering in the future. So now that we've got just the general nature of our show explained, we thought we'd share a little bit about our origin story. So Addison and I actually first met during our teaching days in Texas. Addison was teaching second grade and I was in fourth grade. Eventually, I moved to North Carolina post-COVID, but Addison has family there, and so she would visit a few times a year, and we would keep in touch and see each other when she would come to visit. At the beginning of this year, Addison texted me and said she was coming to visit. We started talking about fantasy books, specifically A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, and very quickly, one thing led to another. And as they say, the rest was history. By March of 2024, we decided, you know what? Fuck it. Let's start a podcast. And Booktown Fantasy was born.
Yeah, we were like, you know, it'd be super fun is if we took on a project that was so large, so immense that it occupied our every waking and sleeping thought. And we never had any free time to do anything else. And this is all we would do. And she was like, yes, sign me up. Let's do it. Yep. And I was like, yes, okay, let's ruin our lives and also do the most fun thing we'll ever do.
Next, we have some get to know us questions so that you all can get a feel for us a little bit better. So our first question, how did you get into fantasy? So I, Lorraine, got into fantasy way back in elementary school, like most millennials. I started with Harry Potter, and then I also read Twilight and, several other classic fantasy series of our time. Once I got to late high school, I took a very long break from reading because I was busy with school studying and sports. And then eventually, as I got older, just working adult life. Then fast forward like a decade later, a friend told me about a series with hot fae men and these different quirks in the fantasy world. And then from the moment I read ACOTAR, I was hooked back into reading fantasy all over again. And honestly, it's been so much fun because I went through a pretty heavy, like, self-help and nonfiction reading phase.
Oh my
which
God.
is fine.
Not fine. No.
It was good for the purpose or like
I
where I was at that stage. But I also felt I lost touch with my inner childhood self that gets to just have fun and get lost in these fictional worlds. So ultimately, I don't know why I ever stopped, but I am very happy that I picked them back up again. So
Me too. You know, your friend would have had me at hot fae men. I would have been like, I don't know what that means, but just give it to me, okay?
immediately,
Just
yes.
Immediately, yes.
So that's my spiel. Addison, what about you?
In preparing for this episode, I started thinking about it and I realized that I have loved fantasies since I was a child. One of my most treasured books from my childhood is called The Search for Delicious by Natalie Babbitt, who also wrote Tuck Everlasting. And only brought that up because I think we all had to freaking read that in school. So I feel like everyone did anyway. Maybe not.
I never read that book.
Really?
Yeah. I don't think it was on my list of
in the Texas schools, we all had to read it. And we read it like right around the time the movie came out. And I don't know. I feel like that's like a core memory that we all experienced. We had to read Tuck Everlasting. It's not bad. It's pretty good actually as far as like required school reading. But yeah, that's what she's most known for. Or at least to me. I don't know. Maybe she's actually has more other wildly popular books that I have no idea. But I also really, really loved Gail Carson Levine. She wrote Ella Enchanted, which was turned into a motion picture starring Anne Hathaway many years ago. She also wrote The Two Princesses of Bamar, which was a foundational book for me as a child. One, because it was so great. And two, the main heroine's name is Addie. So obviously, you know, why not? She also did a great little series where she would put a fun spin on classic fairy tales that I really enjoyed. After that, of course, I was obsessed with Harry Potter and Twilight. I'm not ashamed, okay? I liked Twilight. I feel like there's like this millennial compulsion to retcon that and be like, oh, I didn't like Twilight. I did. I liked it. And you know what? I still like it. I reread it within the last 3 years and I loved every minute of it. It was so bad, but I did like it, okay? So I'm not embarrassed. Very similarly, I also hit a stage of life where I was just really busy with college and I fell out of reading. And it wasn't until a few years after college that I picked it back up. What actually really helped me was listening to audiobooks because I never felt like I had time to sit down and read, but I could listen to my audiobooks while I drove or cleaned or really did anything. What really, truly kind of reignited me and catapulted me back into the world of fantasy, really my burning passion for fantasy, was Fourth Wing. So
that's why we will be covering Onyx Store.
Oh, yeah. You guys are going to hear about that. You guys, I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling Fourth Wing will get mentioned a lot. No spoilers, of course, but I love Fourth Wing.
Yeah. And yes, obviously audiobooks are great.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that every so often comes up in conversation with people. People would be like, well, do audiobooks really count? And I'm like, duh. Yeah, of course they do.
They absolutely do. I don't understand why not. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. It's so exclusionary. It's like you're not special because you read a tangible physical copy. Because people do that with Kindle readers too. I'm like, who cares? You're consuming a story and that's what's important.
Right. I agree. It doesn't really matter what format it takes. So,
yeah. So, Lorraine, what are your favorite fantasy series, book shows, or movies?
Okay. Since reading fantasy has been a newer hobby I've picked back up again, my list is kind of short right now. But some are, of course, Harry Potter, ACOTAR, From Blood and Ash, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, The Crowns of Nyaxia duology, which there's supposed to be more. It's like 3 sets of duologies coming out by Carissa Broadbent. She's an author that I found recently through the Crowns of Nyaxia series, but supposedly she has a really good series called Daughter of No Worlds and other ones as well. So cool. I'm excited to read more of hers. I also love science fiction, and that started with Ender's Game, which I found in my brother's room when I was like 13 or 14, I think. And I just picked it up. I was bored. I didn't have anything to read. I think it was over the summer or something. And I just wandered in there. I was like looking at his books and stuff. And I was like, oh, that looks interesting. I picked it up. And then I loved that book. It was such a good, oh, it was so good.
So wait, let me get this straight. You trespassed, you invaded his privacy, and then you stole from him.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well,
younger sibling energy.
You can tell who's the older sibling and who's the younger sibling, and
yes,
the spin we took on that story. Yeah.
Yep. And then as far as shows and movies go, obviously House of the Dragon, True Blood. There's a series on Amazon Prime called Fallout. That's kind of like a sci-fi fantasy series. Stranger Things, Wednesday, and yeah, there's so many. I'm sure I'm missing many other books or shows that I've watched before that I can't think of right now, but those are just some of the ones that come to mind. So, Addison, what about you? What are your favorite series?
Ooh, I wrote a novel for this one. As I mentioned earlier, Harry Potter, of course, that's OG. But I do have two favorite series that come to mind, although one is unfinished, so I guess I can't truly say it's one of my all-time favorites just yet. It was really challenging because ACOTAR is pretty high up there for me too. I know it's not finished, but it does have 5 books. So you have a pretty good feel for the series so far. But if I really had to pick one favorite series, I would say The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, also better known as the Aragon series.
Oh, yeah.
It's so good. I mentioned earlier that Fourth Wing ignited my burning passion for fantasy, and that's true. After Fourth Wing, I was really like, oh my God, what have I been doing for the last 10 years? Literally, why am I not reading fantasy 24/7? But the months preceding my consumption of Fourth Wing, I had just completed the Aragon series. And so for those of you who haven't read it, first of all, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. But also you should know it's a fat series. The books are very long, which is great because they contain more content, but it took me months to finish it on Audible. Like literally, I think the last book is like 36 hours. It's so long. It's really long. But overall, this series is just absolutely breathtaking. The world building is unbelievably complex and beautiful, and the character development and growth is just off the charts. And of course, there's dragons and magic in it, so it's a no-brainer. Honestly, someday I would love to cover it on the podcast, but because I've read it, it impairs our ability to cover it spoiler-free, but maybe someday. My other favorite series that I mentioned earlier that has yet to be finished, so I can't say for sure, is the Empyrean series, also known as Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So jury's still out on that because we only have 2 of 5. I feel like after Onyx Storm, when that gets released, whenever that will be, I'll know. I'll be like, oh my God, yes, this is going to be the one. But for movies, the only one that came to mind besides the Harry Potter movies that I could just watch again and again is How to Train Your Dragon. I do not care that it's a kids movie. I love it. I love it. And I'm so excited for the live action one. I think it's going to be really good. And then for shows, I honestly can't say there's one that is just the best of the best, but there were a lot of shows that, well, either they were good or I just enjoyed them or both. Some of them were really bad, but I still liked them. But Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Once Upon a Time. I loved The Vampire Diaries in high school. That was an OG shadow daddy right there, Damon Salvatore, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I was always Team Damon. Stefan, no, it was too much.
I forgot about Once Upon a Time. I remember starting that series and I forget why I stopped watching it, but
because it got really bad.
I want to, yeah, maybe that's what.
That's why.
Probably that's why. I started it in like early college at some point, I think.
Yeah. The idea was great. They drug it out too long. They went too far. They expanded the universe too far because the casting, the characters, it was really good in the beginning.
Yes, I agree. I do remember distinctly getting just bored with it at some point, and then I just stopped and never continued. But at the beginning, yeah, it was good. So moving on to our next question. Addison, what do you love about fantasy?
So if you had asked me before I read Fourth Wing, I would have said, oh, I love the magic or dragons. I love dragons, okay? I really love dragons. Literally anything with dragons, as you can probably tell by my previous answers. Post Fourth Wing, I would say Shadow Daddies.
Shadow Daddies.
Shadow Daddies. I love Shadow Daddies. Give me all of the morally gray men. I didn't know that was a thing before I read Fourth Wing, and now it's my favorite thing. But for real, though, I do find myself very drawn to really developed worlds. As I mentioned earlier, the Aragon series has the most incredible world building I've ever encountered. Similarly, I really enjoy complex systems of magic. That really captivates me. And dragons. I know this is going to sound kind of funny, but I always find different authors' takes on dragon culture and politics to be very interesting. They usually have a very different developed set of cultural norms because they're so powerful, they're often magical, and they have extremely long lifespans, which I feel like makes them operate in a different way. Because they're also, in a way, animalistic, you know? I don't know. I've just always really liked that.
Yeah.
I saw this quote recently on social media, and it really, really stuck with me. It's really cheesy. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, it's really cheesy, so just bear with me. But it said, "For everyone who got lost in a book and discovered a universe." That is really how I feel about fantasy books. There's something that's just really wonderful about being pulled in and immersed into this magical world that's so vastly different from our own. And then my last, I know, I try not to overdo it, but here we are. Oh, well, too late now, stopping me now. On a bit of a deeper level, there are many hilarious or emotionally impactful tropes in fantasy series, but one that gets me every single time is oftentimes the character has to go through some kind of trial or challenge, and they have to face who they truly are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And something about that just really speaks to me and moves me. I don't know if it's because of who I am as a person or where I'm at in my life, but I know several of the series that I've mentioned in this episode already have situations like that with their characters. And it gets me every time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
What about you? What do you love about fantasy?
I love fantasy because it allows you to enter into this state of being a kid again. So much of adult life is very serious and ordinary at times. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But there is something so distinctly alluring about the feeling of adventure and novelty that you get through reading. I also love seeing new worlds, exploring themes, just, the human experience, feeling inspired, and then also being able to develop empathy and see different perspectives through the characters that we meet. So similar to you.
Oh, I like that. Also, when you started talking and you said so much of adult life is serious and ordinary, I thought you were going to say, and also does it have any magic or shadow daddies? And then you took it real serious.
That
on
too.
me.
You're so right. Ugh, we need some shadow daddies.
We really
for some
do.
Spice and inspiration in our lives. So,
all right. And last, what fantasy series are you currently reading or have you read most recently?
Ooh, okay. So as I said, I do like science fiction, but I think science fiction and fantasy are pretty close in my mind. I know
the lines
science
are
fiction,
blurred often.
They're very blurred, and science fiction is more in the realm of something that might be possible, like way off in the future, whereas fantasy is thought of as being a category where things that happen in it are impossible. But, whatever, close enough, right? They get pretty murky as far as distinctions go. But one of the more recent ones that I've been reading has been the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. If anybody enjoys science fiction, I highly recommend that so far. I've read the first book, and that is like a 5 or 6 book series. So there's a lot for you to dive into if you start that one. I've also read, as I've said, the Crowns of Nyaxia series. That was a more recent one that I've read. And then the second book of the duology, and now a third book. It's like an in-between between the first two has been released. So yeah, those are pretty good. And then, of course, we do plan to start the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. This will be the second series of hers that we'll be reading. The first one that I read was Akatar, and we're very excited to get into that. So what fantasy series are you currently reading?
I have got several in the works. But because of the spoiler-free nature of the podcast, that does make it a little more challenging because we have to be pretty sure we don't want to cover it before we decide to read it. But I am working through Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas.
Oh, yeah.
We are both also anxiously awaiting the release of Onyx Storm, whenever that may be. So I'm always rereading Fourth Wing and Nine Flame. Always rereading it. I am also getting ready to start Murtag, which is a continuation of the Aragon series. It got released a year ago, 2 years ago. I don't know. And I was so excited about it. And then it's just been sitting on my shelf. I really want to read it. I just have gotten so busy. And then I'm like, I'll read this one. And then I'll read this one. And then I'll read this one later. And then it just keeps getting pushed down. So I'm ready to start it.
I do remember reading Aragon in elementary school. I think it was in like 4th or 5th grade when I started it. But then I stopped because it was unfinished. And I don't remember what happened in between, but I never ended up finishing the series. But I do remember really enjoying the books. So got to add that to my list and just reread it. Because at this point, I've basically forgotten everything. So
yeah.
All right. So that ends our question rounds here, just to get to know us a little bit. And last but not least, now that y'all know what we are all about, this is what you can expect moving forward. Our first book series will be Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, and our first TV show will be House of the Dragon on HBO. And that now concludes our episode. So thank you all for joining us for our introduction episode today. We are so glad that you found us. So please check out our social media pages and give us a follow on your preferred listening platform so you can stay up to date with new episodes every week. Stay nerdy, everyone, and we will catch you all for our very first episode. Bye!
Bye! And stay tuned for some bloopers.
Now that we've got our origin story out of the way, okay.
Say that again, because someone hit someone.
That was Ernie.
I figured it was one of the BBs. One of the BBs.
He's playing with a toy, and I was like, sir.
Well, yeah, because it's time to record, so it's time to play.
I know.
Duh. I'm just like what? What? We're recording? Okay. One of my most treasured books that one of my most treasured books from childhood is called Tenses. Okay. The most incredible world building I've ever did. Ugh.